In this video today, guys, we're going to be taking another look at Harmony. After a significant run in the last couple of days, we've had a bit of a pullback. So I wanted to kind of give you guys an update as to how Harmony 1 is progressing and if it or not is likely to fall down any further or if it is going to start to see an increase in value once again. Guys, as we get into this video, if you find it useful, hit that like button. I really appreciate it. If you're new, make sure you're subscribed, tap that bell, hit on all notifications, and you won't miss another video. Right, with that said, let's get into what is going on here with Harmony. Right, so here we have Harmony 1 to the USDT. This is the daily chart and Binance is the data source. And what we're going to do is just kind of talk briefly around what's happened in the last couple of days. There's been some fantastic news with a partnership with Luna or Terra Luna. Ultimately, talking around what this might mean both for Harmony and for of course, Luna. Now, that partnership is huge in terms of the amount of processing of transactions that Luna does, and this bridge between the two of them and the partnership between the two of them could be absolutely fantastic. So it's really going to be key to see how that partnership develops and flourishes in the future. But on the back of this news, we had a really good, significant run on Harmony yesterday. It was a good recovery. Obviously, we have seen Harmony 1 much higher, but obviously during the Bitcoin correction where Bitcoin is today, Harmony 1 has obviously had a significant correction. So a good recovery was made yesterday, and it took out a couple of really good key areas for us. So on this chart, we could obviously see that we were looking to try to flip the 7.9 cent. That actually happened yesterday. We went well above there. We also went up towards the 9.1 cent area. There's at that point where we're overbought, and there was a bit of a correction that was due. We obviously saw Bitcoin have a correction today. So ultimately, Harmony 1 has had a pullback, and it's actually pulled back quite significantly. But good news, guys, is it has actually held up our 7.9 support line pretty well. So obviously on this daily chart, we can see lots going on here. So we obviously have the 5 impulse waves to the upside, the fourth wave, which is where we currently are, looking to try to push past the boundary levels up here to signal us into that fifth wave. We have the Fibonacci retracement tool with the idea that ultimately we could see Harmony 1 rise up to about 79.8 cent. And of course, we have that psychological $1 kind of threshold as well. So for me personally, it feels like we're going to end up somewhere between this 79.8 cent and that $1 threshold. And again, for everything that Harmony 1 is doing, it's hard to think that this thing already isn't above $1. It does not take a lot of money to actually make this needle move to the upside significantly. So we may actually come across some fundamentals that are shifting and changing their technicals. And what we mean by this is obviously we have bridges going to Ethereum, we have bridges going to Bitcoin, and we obviously have loads of partnerships and things going on in the space as well. We obviously have new projects launching such as NFTs, and obviously there's loads of different DEXs also operating on the Harmony blockchain. So as a result of all of these things, you could actually start to see an adoption level of Harmony that helps push the price much higher than what the technicals are currently suggesting right now. So for thinking where we are in this cycle, this year, we obviously have the Fibonacci suggesting just under 80 cent. We obviously do have a psychological barrier of $1. So I feel it's going to be somewhere in that range. I think longer term, if we think right where things are going, Harmony are definitely doing all the right things to future-proof the chain. And therefore, potentially, talk about 2025 in that particular cycle, I think we're going to get blown out of the water with how high Harmony 1 is going to go. So let's get into what's been going on more of the shorter term. Obviously, yesterday and today. Now we obviously kind of know where we are aiming to go towards the end of the year. So let's pull this down into our hourly view, and we'll just expand this up for a moment. So obviously this is the moment that we could see yesterday. We started to have this really good, significant run to the upside. And then obviously we had the correction that was due. So I'll zoom in a little bit further so we can get that in a little bit more detail, right? So basically we had a real good run. We took out the 6.7 cent over here. Okay, so we kind of had this breakthrough event that actually happened on the 6th of July at about 11 o'clock. We then retested this area as a support line, and then we started to see a significant push to the upside as we went into the 7th of July. Going into the 7th, we found the barrier of 7.9 cent. And obviously, in the back of that news, we broke that barrier, made sure that that barrier was a good support line, and then we pushed up to the next level, which was 9.1 cent. So in the space of a couple of days, we actually went all the way from down here on the 6th and 5th, right? So from the 5th, we went from this area all the way up to this area here which basically was 50% in gains, right? So if you're entering here and you're exiting there, you did very, very well for yourself. If you're a trader, of course, just as a hodler, there's plenty of opportunities to basically dollar cost average better positions, as we've been speaking about many times to our members. There's a buy zone down here. This is the area that I still think we are potentially going to go back into at some point. If Bitcoin does correct down to, let's say, 24K to 28K, then there is a possibility of slipping down here for an accumulation point before we do actually go ahead and trigger some fantastic gains. Now, what we saw here was we actually found that resistance up at 9.1, and when we were up there, we were overbought. Okay, so we were talking about this yesterday, saying that a correction was going to be due, and that we wanted to kind of turn this area of 7.9 cent into a support line so that we can start to take this motion back to the upside. Obviously, in order to do that, we obviously had to have several things line up very well for us. We obviously slipped down here just a little bit, okay, so just below our support line before we actually went right back up here. So that was good. But the other thing that we needed to obviously make sure happened was that we had good volume decreasing as we had this correction go to the downside. And we obviously saw some volume coming in here, so some buy orders were probably placed back down towards our support line. We can see that volume coming in here. Other than that, we actually saw exactly what we needed to, right? We saw that volume decrease over time whilst we decreased our price. Now, obviously, we actually started to push the price back up just here, and that volume has still decreased. So I feel that's generally going to be around the sentiment of the overall crypto space. Obviously, you know, when we could look at Evise artificial intelligence to see, okay, what's the fear and greed index looking at? We did this yesterday, so we kind of have a good idea that there is still fear here inside the space. And until we see that sentiment shift, which will be good volume on the motion to the price moving up, right? So when we saw this price motion to the upside, we saw volume increasing positively to the upside, right? So ultimately, that's the sentiment that we're looking for. And when we decrease the price, we want to decrease the volume. And that shows us that there's not that much fear in the space, and everyone is just dollar cost averaging those positions. And so that's kind of what we saw for the first half here. We saw a decent kind of reduction in volume, but it did continue as we started to stabilize up here. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means ultimately that we've actually got the relative strength index stabilized at around 50. We dropped it a little bit lower, so it's around that midway point on this hourly chart. Now, from an hourly point of view, you'd actually want this thing a little bit lower so that you can utilize the space more efficiently. So the chances are that we're actually going to move the price up. I imagine that we'll have a motion to push the price up in the next kind of little while here. But we will find resistance a little bit shorter of this area here. So it'll be a lower high, if you will. And that could potentially be signaling that we could be on for a downward trend. But again, it will depend on whether or not Bitcoin decides to actually get a correction from its current levels as well. So right now, the volume is going to be the main driver behind this, and to see that sentiment in the market. And there's lots of stuff going on in and around the space, talking around lots of different things in terms of, you know, great partnerships, but then also there's loads of, you know, scary articles out there at the moment. You know, from a UK point of view, we have all those banks basically now rejecting crypto exchanges. We can no longer fund those crypto exchanges, and it's pretty much most of, if not all, the mainstream retail banks, and they're now blocking retail investors from actually entering the crypto space from a UK point of view. So obviously it's going to be incredibly difficult to start to see new investors come in from the UK. Whether this starts to spread across to other jurisdictions across Europe, you know, Australia or the US, time will tell. Binance obviously have been communicating thoroughly throughout this to obviously talk about you know, what they are seeing and why they're working with regulators. So really, this is just banks leveraging. And I think Chris has spoken about this a few times, so if not, check out those videos where we're talking about the banking side of things. But basically, the actual government side, the regulatory bodies are not forcing this action. This is banks taking advantage of the FCA in this particular case. And they are basically misinforming their retail customers. You know, they're angling it a very specific way, but it's not actually factual against what the FCA is saying. They're just taking advantage of the situation, preventing that money from entering the crypto space, i.e. staying in the bank accounts. So with all that kind of stuff going on, that sentiment is obviously going to be quite a negative one, and it is impacting the space. We can see this being reflected across many of these different cryptocurrencies at the moment as well. So although we've had a fantastic motion to the upside over the last day or so with Harmony One, the correction has actually held well. We've got a good support line. We could start to see the price move up again, but we do need to see that sentiment shift, and we haven't yet seen it. So we are mindful that the volumes are low and that we do need to see that volume grow and increase in order to really take advantage of the relative strength index and obviously get a good motion to the upside. Now, I reckon that we'll probably end up reaching about I'm going to say it's probably going to be between 8.8 and 8.6. It's going to be somewhere in this zone here. I would have thought that's where we're going to find the resistance for us to kind of then get a bit of a reversal and a secondary test of our support line of 7.9. So be prepared for a bit of volatility in this area. What we want to do is obviously hold this. So, getting that volume nice and low is going to be absolutely key for sideways trading here. So until that sentiment in the market shifts, the best thing to do is hodl, dollar cost average better positions where you can. And obviously be mindful that when we take a look at this on the daily chart, we actually do have this buy zone, and this is something that we've been talking about as well for a while. I still feel that there's one more opportunity in this buy zone, that we might actually come down here if Bitcoin is following Bitcoin's current schematic of the Wyckoff accumulation as we enter a spring event. It's not guaranteed, it's possible. So I'm saying that depending on which way the institutions take this, to the upside or to the downside, there'll be an additional opportunity on many of these altcoins to again stack up. Now, this is not following the schematic perfectly. It's not ideal. It definitely doesn't suit my OCD. But again, this is not aligned either to a phase C scenario either. In fact, we should have actually have risen this much significantly higher by now. According to phase C, we should actually be in phase D at this point. If this in fact was the spring based on the pattern that we've seen here so far, we were due to go to the upside. So this is unusual to say the least, and we'll be monitoring this because again, the expectation was to go up to about 40k before we had to pull back towards this area here. And obviously the impact of that on Harmony 1 is that you would basically come down into this buy zone if we did actually have a spring event occur. So it's still possible, not going to rule it out just yet. So I'm mindful that although we're trading inside these two key areas between 7.9 and 9.1 cent, I am mindful that if Bitcoin does have a deeper correction, then we have got that opportunity to accumulate down here just below 5.5 cent. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. In fact, if I go back to Bitcoin's chart here, I actually believe we're more than likely going to see the red scenario here, rather than our yellow spring scenario. I think that the institutions will take the price of Bitcoin higher to liquidate anyone shorting Bitcoin thinking that it's going down to 20k. So I think that's the more likely scenario rather than this one. So I'm not saying for sure that we are going to see this accumulation zone get filled, but there's a possibility that the institutions do take Bitcoin down lower. And if they do, then that is where we accumulate one Harmony before we go up to our bigger view, heading up towards that 79.8 cent to $1 level Harmony 1. Guys, hopefully you found this brief update on Harmony useful and informative. Obviously, lots going on in the space, and it's good to be mindful and aware of current situations, but also keeping in mind that long-term view. If you found it useful, hit the like button. I do appreciate that. If you're new, make sure you're subscribed, tap that bell, hit on all notifications, and you won't miss any more videos. With that said, done and out of the way, I'll catch you all in the next one.